The fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Reb Shalom Dov Ber, was once asked to define what is a chassid. And he replied, a chassid is a lamplighter. A lamplighter has a pole with fire in it. He knows that the fire is not his own, and his job is to light all of the lamps that are on his route. What if the lamp is in a distant wilderness? Then he must go there and light that lamp. What if the lamp is in the sea? Then he must take off his clothes, jump into the water, and light the lamp there. And that is a chassid? The Rebbe was asked. The Rebbe thought for a long moment and said, yes, that is a chassid. Everything the chassid has, his talent, his energy, his material and spiritual possessions, are all in service of a higher calling and mission.
My name is Yaakov Yisroel Deitch. I'm known as Yisroel. I'm named after my dear great-grandfather, Rabbi Yaakov Yisroel Zuber. My great-grandfather was a great chassid and a shliach of the Rebbe Rashab and of the Frierdiker Rebbe.
His focus in life was in service of others. He was dedicated to carrying out the Rebbe's mission and message to communities where he was needed.
In 1917, 95 years ago, the Rebbe Rashab sent my great-grandfather, Yaakov Yisroel, to an army base to bring and to inspire the Jewish soldiers that were there. On his return back to Lubavitch, the Rebbe Rashab asked him a lot of details about exactly what took place. My wife and I moved out on shlichus only a few months ago. We moved to Bronxville, New York, to service the students at Sarah Lawrence College. This inspiration came very much from my great-grandfather, Rabbi Yaakov Yisroel. Many times when I'm on shlichus, I feel like not every detail is important. It's only the big things that are important. But then I remember the great story that I heard many, many times of our dear great-grandfather. How when he came back from his shlichus, the Rebbe Rashab wanted to know the details. The details is what matters. What did you speak to them about? Were they receptive? Were they inspired? Were they open to Yiddishkeit? And that is what gave the Rebbe Rashab his pleasure and his nachas. I feel that when I'm on shlichus, every moment that I'm there, the Rebbe cares about exactly what is being done.
Rabbi Yaakov Yisroel Zuber was the epitome of a lamplighter. With the strength of Torah, with his own unique gifts, and especially with the power of the Rebbe that he carried with him wherever he went, he was able to illuminate the spiritual wasteland of Gruzia. He was able to warm the hearts and souls of his brethren in the cold expanse of Sweden, and he was able to spread Torah and Chassidus in Boston. His legacy lives on through his descendants, who each in their own way are spreading the light throughout the world with acts of goodness and kindness.
As we commemorate 60 years since the passing of zt'l Yaakov Yisroel, I carry his name and I carry his mission. I carry what he lived for. Yaakov Yisroel gave over his life for another Yid, and that's what we do on our shlichus. We take every opportunity possible to help another Yid, if it's helping him in his spiritual path or it's helping him in his physical path. Just like zt'l Yaakov Yisroel went out of his way to help another Yid, that's what I try to do, carry on exactly in zt'l Yaakov Yisroel's footsteps.
In 1894, my newly married grandparents, Reb Menachem Mendel and Shana Oken Zuber, settled in the city of Chedrin in White Russia. Poverty was rampant. Jews were restricted to live in a designated area called the Pale, and ownership of land was forbidden. In 1844, the third Chabad Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, founded Chedrin, the first Jewish agricultural settlement in Russia. Many occupations and commercial enterprises were unobtainable for Jews, and owning land and engaging in agriculture vastly improved life of the Hasidim. The Chedrin settlement flourished, and the Tzemach Tzedek received much praise from the Minister of Interior and the title Honorary Citizen. In 1827, Tsar Nicholas I issued the Cantonist Edict to enforce the unification of his country through Russification. Young Jewish boys, even as young as 9 years old, were literally kidnapped from their villages and forcibly enrolled in cantons, military schools, until the age of 18, and then forced into military service for a total of 25 years. The hope of the Tsar was that the young men would forget their Jewish heritage and become loyal Russian citizens. The settlement of Chedrin was an effective countermeasure, as the boys could be protected from the kidnappers, and thus the Hasidim were anxious to settle here. In 1896, my father, Reb Yaakov Yisroel Zuber, the second of 11 children, the first son, was born here. His first teacher was his father, Reb Menachem Mendel, a Melamed and a Shochet. At age 10, he went to the town of Lubavitch to study at Tomchei Tmimim, the yeshiva established in 1897 by the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab. My father was an outstanding student, diligent in his studies, with deep intellectual understanding. Life was filled with hardships. He rolled his own cigarettes and smoked to still the constant pangs of hunger. The only time the yeshiva boys enjoyed a full meal was on Shabbos, when they were hosted by local families. He melted together small stubs of candles to have light for learning during the long, dark winter nights. He received no phone calls, no packages from home, rarely even a note or a letter. His reputation in the yeshiva as a Talmud Chacham was widespread. In 1917, during the Bolshevik Revolution, at age 22, he was sent as a shliach by the Rebbe Rashab to an army base to celebrate Purim with Jewish soldiers. Upon his return, he received great praise from the Rebbe for his successful journey. A doctor subsequently placed his arm in a cast as camouflage, and thus he was exempt from army duty in that treacherous time period. In 1919, just before Pesach, his father, Reb Menachem Mendel, lost his life in a robbery. He had visited nearby communities to shecht chickens for a holiday and was returning home with his earnings. My father left the yeshiva and returned home to assist his widowed mother. He became a melamed, a teacher. In 1921, he married Zlata Golbin from Streshin, the daughter of Reb Chaim and Sima. The young couple settled in Streshin, and in 1922, he received smicha from 3 well-known rabbis. That year, he was sent as a shliach by the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz, to Sachchere in Georgia, Georgia, to the Berg Yidden in the mountains of Caucasia, Kafkas. This project had been initiated by the Rebbe Rashab. In this primitive region of illiterate poor Jews, he served as Rebbe, teacher, shochet, moel, baltville, and balkora. All tasks he performed with great devotion and diligence. He learned the Gruzinish language and became an effective leader, inspiring the community and teaching the youth. He remained here for 6 years until 1928, and here 4 children were born: Menachem Mendel, Shalom Ber, and Leah, and a baby girl who was nifter in early childhood. After his release from jail and his subsequent trip to Israel and the United States, in 1927, the Rebbe Rayatz encouraged the Hasidim to relocate to the United States. The Stalin era was brutal. My father prepared to leave Sachchere and joined Hasidim in Riga, in the independent Baltic country of Latvia, as the first step of the journey. The day before his departure, he was robbed and left destitute, without a single ruble. Anguished, he contacted his beloved Rebbe, and within a day or 2, he received sufficient funds to undertake the journey. Leaving Russia was a tremendous relief, but it was a bittersweet departure to leave dear family members, most of whom they never saw again. The stay in Riga was pleasant, in the company of his Rebbe and a large group of Hasidim. While waiting for visas, he received a letter from his 4 siblings in the States: Aunt Rose, Tante Sophie, Tante Hanne, and Uncle Nassunate, telling him not to come. The stock market crash of 1929 had created havoc. He was in a quandary. In 1931, a committee arrived in search of a rabbi for the only Orthodox shul in Stockholm, Sweden, Adas Yisroel. They were seeking a multi-talented individual who could be a leader, Rebbe, Balkora, Baltville, Shochet, Mohel, someone with all the qualifications that he possessed and had utilized in Sachchere. With the encouragement and blessings of the Rebbe Rayatz, he crossed the Baltic Sea to Stockholm on an overnight journey on a ferry ship. He was a great Torah scholar and also had a good knowledge of math and science, and was familiar with many aspects of Jewish European history. Scandinavia, however, was unknown to him, for this area had never played an important role on the Jewish scene. The trip was highly successful. The congregants, Yiddish-speaking Russian and Polish Jews, with a few Balabatim of German descent, were warm and welcoming. The city was beautiful, modern, and comfortable. The plan was to remain here for a few short years until the situation in the United States improved and immigration would be possible. Der Mensch tracht und Gott lacht. Man proposes and God disposes. In 1933, Hitler was elected Chancellor of Germany. Nazism was rapidly expanding. Doors were closing. Life for Jews in Europe changed drastically. His position as Rav was challenging and fulfilling. Economically, life was good, and Sweden was spared the horrors of the Holocaust. It was, however, a very lonely existence, without extended family, without his beloved Rebbe and Hasidim, and with very few Torah scholars. There were two major highlights. In 1937, my father attended the last pre-war Agudas Yisroel conference in Marienbad, where the most prominent leaders of European Jewry assembled. In 1940, he was filled with joy when the Rebbe Rayatz and his entourage stayed in Stockholm for several days, the first stop on their journey to New York. My father played a very important role in Sweden during and after World War II. The United States was at war with Japan, and my father, in neutral Sweden, became the intermediary to send desperately needed funds to the yeshiva students of Lubavitch and Mir Yeshiva who were in Shanghai. He helped supply visas to countries in South America. His home was a haven, open to all refugees as they were escaping Europe. There were no kosher restaurants in the city, and in the Zuber home, one could find food, advice, and encouragement. When the Danish Jews were rescued on the fishing boats, our home was filled with additional guests for Shabbos. The children from the German kinder transport became frequent guests in our home. And Avi, a 10-year-old Finnish boy, lived in our home for 2 years after escaping from his country. After the war, my father was busy night and day trying to help the unfortunate Agunot, to help them obtain a get in order to be free to remarry. He spent endless hours listening to their first-hand reports of the unspeakable experiences in concentration camps. And I watched as he visibly aged, his black hair and beard becoming tinged with gray. He was filled with compassion and distress. In 1946, he no longer wanted to remain in Europe. The Rebbe Rayatz was contacted, and he received a telegram instructing him to find a suitable replacement before leaving. When the replacement was found, my father was offered the position of Rosh Yeshiva of Central Tomchei Tmimim in New York City. He resigned his lifetime position at Adas Yisroel and packed his valuable library of Svarim to ship to the United States. Miraculously, the Rosh Yeshiva from Otvosk in Europe reappeared, having survived the Holocaust in Russia, and my father nobly gave up his intended position. Upon arrival to the United States, the Rebbe sent him to Boston, Massachusetts, to become Rav of the Lubavitch Shul in Dorchester and Dean of the Lubavitch Yeshiva. In the fall of 1946, while we were preparing to leave Stockholm, my brother Mendel married Sarah Einhorn, a Holocaust survivor. Their wedding was a very emotional experience, with my father officiating. The event took place in our home. The chuppah was in our dining room, and the dinner in the combined area of our father's study and our parents' bedroom, with all the furniture moved away for the festive meal. The union of a Holocaust survivor with the son of Rabbi Zuber was a momentous occasion. We arrived in Boston in 1947 after a few weeks in New York and moved into an attic apartment on Intervale Street in Roxbury. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a bathroom. No dining room, no living room or study. A place that was unbearably hot in the summer. Economically, our move was a huge step downward. My brave father, who had just turned 50 and was devastated by the hatred and destruction of the Holocaust, uprooted the family only for the purpose of Jewish survival. To this cramped, barren attic, David Edelman came to meet my sister Leah. In June 1948, Leah married David in New York City at the Gold Manor. My brother Sholem was not at the wedding because he was still in Sweden, completing his service in the Swedish Army. I was very excited to be the bridesmaid, and my parents were quite pleased to have an American son-in-law with a car. In 1948, there were several other great changes in our life. My father became the Rav at the large synagogue in Roxbury, the Crawford Street Shul, and we moved into a nice, spacious apartment on Howland Street. On Lag Bomer that year, my brother Sholem married Yenti Gans, a friend of Sarah's, also a Holocaust survivor, in Karlskrona, Sweden. No family members were present, as we were all living in Boston. In 1948, Henny was born to Mendel and Sarah, and my parents became grandparents. Slowly, our family began to grow. In 1949, Sholem and Yenti arrived in the United States and temporarily moved into our home. In March, Sima, the second grandchild, was born to David and Leah, and that same spring, Shia was born to Sholem and Yenti. My father was invited to become a member of the Beis Din of Boston, a prestigious position. I graduated high school, and my father was very happy about my acceptance to college. I was disappointed when he did not attend my graduation, but he did promise to attend my college graduation. Sadly, by that time, he was gone. Leah and David moved from Mattapan and became shluchim in Springfield, Massachusetts. Sholem and Mendel lived with their families in Boston. My father and mother were quite happy, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Our home was spacious. My father's professional life was fulfilling. My mother attended night school to learn English, and their circle of friends was steadily growing. On the 14th of Teves, 1953, our lives were changed forever. On the preceding evening, my father escorted me to Warmbeck Street for my very small impromptu birthday celebration at the home of a friend, a neighbor of Sholem. I will never forget our walk on that star-filled quiet night with light snow falling. My father insisted on accompanying me, though it was early evening, and this was highly unusual. On the way back home, a short 12-minute walk on the shortcut through the pocket-sized Horatio Harris Park, he was mugged and thrown to the ground. The next day, January 1st, 1953, He was nifter in the hospital from a brain concussion. The first time I entered this park after that fateful day was Memorial Day 2007, when I went there with Izzy Zuber. It was an eerie feeling to think that assailants were probably hiding behind these rocks. This has remained an unsolved crime. In 1953, I graduated college, but the excitement was greatly diminished by our recent loss. In 1954, I was married to Mottel Sharfstein in Aperian Plaza in Roxbury, and I keenly felt the absence of my father. He was not there to walk with me to the chuppah, not to officiate, or to give me one of the 7 blessings. One of my most precious gifts was the letter that my brother Shalom gave me, a letter from our father for his wedding day in Sweden, a letter focusing on the meaning of marriage. The presence of my nieces Sima, Cyril, and Rivka as flower girls, Henny as the junior bridesmaid, and Shia as the ring bearer brought me great joy at this bittersweet moment in my life. In 1958, my mother Zlata Zuber was nifter. Being in a new country, with a new language, a new culture, and living in Boston without close relatives, the sudden loss of my father overwhelmed her. She was only 62 years old, but without my father, her life had lost meaning. The joy of life had been extinguished. My father accomplished much in his short life. He was a true shliach, and his entire life was dedicated to serving his Rebbe. His shlichus included 1 year in Stettin, 6 years in Sachchere, 3 years in Riga, 16 years in Stockholm, and just 6 short years in Boston. Wherever he lived, he dedicated himself to building a strong Jewish community. The Hillel School in Sweden today has between 200 and 300 students. It was established by one of his Talmidim. Zichron Yaakov, a sefer of Shilas and Chuvas, related specifically to the Scandinavian area, was published posthumously. The legacy he left behind is far richer than any material goods. Wherever my father lived, his love of Torah study was the main focus of his existence. He loved to learn and was always seen with a sefer. His descendants today number about 400. There are doctors, lawyers, teachers, therapists, business entrepreneurs, a banker, and a dental hygienist. All are hardworking, honest, decent, productive people. He inspired his grandchildren and great-grandchildren to follow in his footsteps and become shluchim in communities across the United States. His legacy lives on. The life of Chassid is filled with challenges. This is a life filled with meaning and purpose, a celebration of life. Rabbi Yaakov Yisroel Zuber fulfilled his tafkid as a chassid and as a shliach. He helped make this world a better place. He helped hasten the arrival of Mashiach. May his memory sustain us and always inspire and fortify us.